Swords to Plowshares is often considered the gold standard when it comes to removal spells. Not just in EDH, but Magic as a whole, or at least wherever the card is legal. So if a card is efficient and powerful enough to show up as a 4-of in Legacy decks, surely the card is good enough for your Commander deck. In this video, I want to explore options for removal and try to determine what could be the best piece of removal in EDH. But first, if you want to buy some removal, you can go to Cool Stuff Inc. and use code TTM for a discount. Thanks to Cool Stuff Inc. for sponsoring the video. Let's look at Swords. One of the most played cards in EDH, according to EDH Rec, ranking just below Arcane Signet and Sol Ring. At 1 mana, it's basically as cheap as removal can be. Plus, with all of the reprints, it's easy to get your hands on. There are no conditions, it just exiles a creature, which gets around pesky indestructible threats. It always answers the threat as long as it's a legal target, and the downside of life gain is pretty negligible, especially in a 40 life format. This card is good creature removal. There's no secret, oh it's bad here. It is a powerful card, and I do use it in some decks. But there are downsides to Swords to Plowshares. What if there's something on board which isn't a creature that you want to remove? Then Swords is literally useless. This is where we start to see the card falter a bit. Let's compare to Assassin's Trophy. This can destroy anything, no matter what the permanent type is. It doesn't exile, but 2 mana remove anything is pretty damn good. Plus, giving your opponent 1 basic is not much of a downside. But what about Chaos Warp? I mean, this can remove anything just like the trophy, and gets past indestructible like Swords does. Plus, in theory, you could have no downside if they flip into a non-permanent card. And then, wait a minute, what about Counterspell? Not only can this hit any type of card, but it stops ETB effects and death triggers. Plus, it can hit instants and sorceries, which all these other cards can't do. Oh, and how could we forget about cards like Oubliette, which phases out a creature. And if you use this on an opponent's commander, it doesn't get to go back to the command zone, since it didn't actually change zones. Does that make Oubliette worth even more than one of these other cards because permanently removing a commander is quite strong? And all of these cards I've mentioned so far have the downside of being a 1-for-1. What about Farewell, Cyclonic Rift, Ruinous Ultimatum? In terms of mana efficiency, yeah, Swords to Plowshares is 1 mana remove anything, but these can often remove more than 1 card per mana. All of these factors make deciding what the best removal for EDH is pretty difficult. I also wanted to source some community opinions and see what people thought. I asked my patrons in my Discord server to see where they lie on this. I got some fun answers. Crozan Grip, love that card, Beast Within, Anguished Unmaking, and Imprisoned in the Moon. All great cards. Then patrons started talking about board wipes. I also asked on Twitter what you thought the best removal spell is, and got a couple of wacky answers. So the debate seems to be efficient spot removal or powerful board wipes, which is best? And I actually think the answer is neither for most decks. A lot of times people refer to removal as the veggies in your deck. And on some level, I like this analogy. Veggies are something you might not like, but it is good for you overall, so you should probably have some. And there are people who don't eat any veggies and are worse off for it. Just like if you don't run removal, you'll probably end up losing a lot of games because of one random force field or something. If you don't run any removal, I promise adding a little bit will make your decks more fun to play since you don't get stopped by random cards. But just like veggies in real life, removal doesn't need to be something you don't like. Yeah, eating raw Brussels sprouts sucks, but add a few ingredients, throw it in the oven, it's a real dish. A lot of people will look at their deck, and if they're a responsible gamer, they will add a few counterspells, a couple of board wipes, some spot removal, ideally those that can hit any card type or some efficient ones. And then they call it a day, treating the removal package the same as their mana base. Just something needed for the deck to function, which is totally fine. Your deck will run well enough if you have some generic, efficient, good removal spells in there, but it won't always be the best removal for your deck. When comparing Shriekmaw to Slaughter Pact, it might feel like the Pact is a much better option. 0 mana is pretty efficient, but if you're playing something like Carador, where you can recast the Shriekmaw over and over again, this virtual card advantage you're getting from the creature is likely to be more value than any single targeted piece of removal. Plus, you're getting any other synergies you might have for a card leaving your graveyard. Once you do that, Shriekmaw is not a random veggie, but a whole part of the meal, with all the proper seasonings and synergy. A synergy piece that fits well with the commander and the theme of the deck. This is what you should aim to have as your removal. Not only does it make your deck stand out a little bit by having a more unique piece of removal than just some efficient one, it's also often more powerful than generic one-time effects. I love finding a great utility removal spell that fits perfectly in a deck, like Fuel for the Cause. Not a great counterspell, but in a Tekkathol deck, you could get a ton of extra value from this counterspell. Or Beseiju in a Gitrog deck, for example, you get extra card draw. Although Beseiju is already a really great card, so maybe that's not a crazy example. And beyond synergy, finding ways to reuse that removal is really great. Like the Carador example from earlier, reusing removal gives you pseudo card advantage that makes it a lot better than just a one-time effect. I have a Taunos deck built around Salvaging Station, so Aether Spellbomb is often the best card in the deck as far as removal, since I can reuse the card over and over again. Or transformation effects with Mazzy. You can turn a creature into a tree, and then when it dies, reuse the spell. Or even something as simple as a Memnarch in a Turbo Ramp deck. You can just repeatedly steal things. Spine of Ishtar is another favorite of mine. I like to combo it with Bosch Iron Golem, one of my personal favorite cards. You can fling the spine for damage, and when you get it back, just blow up another permanent every turn that you need the effect. Board wipes are also like this. 4 mana clear all creatures is the going rate for a good unconditional board clear. There are a few exceptions for good board wipes you can cast for less mana, but they usually require a little something extra, like paying life or have some restriction about creatures on board. And if you want a board wipe that removes everything, you often need to spend 6 or more mana. But wouldn't it be great if your board wipe was one-sided? Like a Rift, but you know, other than that card. These days, we get a lot of specific board wipes. You might be able to find something that fits your deck perfectly, especially if you're in white. Like Winds of Wrath. If you're an Aura deck, then this is a one-sided board wipe, since most people don't play random auras in their decks. The Battle of Bywater is perfect for a low-to-the-ground aggressive deck, or one with food synergies. Subterranean Tremors can be great in a deck with a lot of flyers. Crux of Fate is one of the best board wipes for dragon decks. There are so many excellent board wipes that can be almost one-sided, it's usually worth the 1 extra mana compared to a 4 mana option. You also need to think about what your deck will struggle against. I don't play Swords or Path in my mono white Heliod deck. The reason is, the deck has a Pillow Fort sub-theme, and the deck makes a ton of tokens with the commander. Usually, it's hard for them to attack me, and I can chump block pretty easily. Instead, I play more flexible removal. I can still hit creatures with spot removal if needed, but I would rather have the flexibility. And since this is a control deck with so few creatures, I play additional board wipes and cards like Humility just to shut down creatures. So I'm usually more worried about things that are non-creatures. You could say the opposite for my Mardu Goad deck. Yes, I do have a few board wipes in there, but considering part of my win con is having other people's creatures attack, I don't want to be casting board wipes every turn. So I would rather pick out the specific creature with an ability that's causing me issues, and leave everything else in play so that they can be goaded, which is why I run Swords and Path in this list. In a vacuum, Swords to Plowshares might seem like the best removal spell, but oftentimes if you dig deep, you can find some synergistic piece that will be worth the extra mana. Adding more synergistic removal is a great way to make your deck feel more fun when adding your removal. You know, making those veggies taste better. Plus, keeping in mind what your deck's goal already is. There is a small caveat to this. Although I think you should add more fun, interesting synergistic removal to your decks, I would be wary of adding only removal that works when you have synergy in place. Like if you're playing a Blink deck, and your only ways to deal with artifacts and enchantments are tied to creatures. Then, if you get hit with a single Torpor Orb effect, your whole deck is shut down, removal included. I would never construct a deck with 0 generic spot removal, since you never know what's gonna show up. 1 or 2 pieces could save you. There's a balance to this. It's good to have some amount of cards that can operate on their own. You don't want your whole list to be full of cards that only function when you're already ahead and doing your thing. But again, it's kind of boring to just have a good stuff deck of efficient cards with no interlocking theme. It is a casual, fun format after all. So for removal and card draw, I would say leave a couple of generic options in there just to be safe. I also want to give a final answer here, just in case people want to know what I think. Is Swords the best removal spell in EDH for a generic deck, ignoring synergy cards? Honestly, I would say no. It's really good, don't get me wrong. But I genuinely think that something which hits more permanent types is going to be better on average. Think about when you use removal in Casual Commander. Usually you don't need to remove something on turn 4 or earlier, so the mana efficiency that you get from swords that you would want in another format like Legacy or in CEDH isn't as relevant. Most casual games are a bit slower. The late game threats just come later. Of course, this depends on your playgroup, but I would say for the average casual Commander player, I think something like Get Lost is better than Swords because it is worth the extra mana to have more flexibility. A Holy Frazzle came into my head. I think Anguished Unmaking is the best removal in the format. Generous Gift, Beast Within, and Assassin's Trophy are very close though. Thanks for watching. What do you think the best removal spell is? Do you agree Anguished Unmaking in a vacuum is the best one? Do you agree that synergy cards are often the best answer for most decks? Also, let me know what's the perfect piece of removal in your favorite deck. If you want to support me, consider subscribing and checking out the Patreon. There's a lot of cool perks, and I'm going to be uploading some bonus content there as well.